Hey there, thank you for watching. If you like what you see and hear, please subscribe and hit that bell button. Warning, everything you're about to see and hear comes from newspaper articles, court transcripts, and interviews with those involved. Thank you for watching. The Klan would rise again in Knoxville, Tennessee, and the media would fuel the fire. The case was largely ignored by the national media, besides a few stories here and there. Many of the stories that were released contained damning errors. Early in the case, a deputy United States Marshal in Kentucky claimed that Channon Chirstian was gang raped repeatedly for 4 days before her body was discovered. The media ran with it. Another account said that the pair had been sexually mutilated. Some media outlets reported that Channon had been dismembered. Some of the rumors were downright bizarre, including one claim that Britney Spears would star as Channon Chirstian in a new film called Knoxville Carjacking Party. Well, Justin Timberlake and Lil Wayne were going to be in the movie as well. A supposed insider said that a possible deal would depend on Britney's stamina in the bedroom. As ludicrous as it may sound, many believe the story, and it is still out there on reputable websites today. Many were outraged by the lack of mainstream media attention. That ultimately resulted in cries of racial bias, with many believing that the crime would have received more attention much quicker had the races been reversed. Knox County Public Defender Mark Stevens insisted that the case just wasn't worthy of national news coverage. Unfortunately, this probably happens in major metropolitan areas every month, he would say. The Knoxville News Sentinel spoke with locals back in May of 2007. They spoke with one man who claimed that crimes committed by black people are always made to look worse. He also said that people would smirk and say, "Well, that's just what we expect from blacks." Knox News Sentinel writer Greg Johnson would go on to put the crimes on the level of the murders of James Byrd Jr. and Matthew Shepard, before suggesting that there should be a national debate about race. Country singer Charlie Daniels wouldn't call it reverse racism, but he did say that it was selective journalism. He went on to say, "Shame on the American media for letting such a violent crime as this slip through the cracks. I wonder what else they're not reporting." Knox News would lash out at Daniels for seeding lies and nurturing hate. As for Chris's mother, Mary, she suspected that racial hatred was involved and that it was indeed a hate crime. "If this wasn't a hate crime, then I don't know how you would define a hate crime." She would also add, "It may have started out as a carjacking, but what it developed into was blacks hating whites." The Against Black Crimes group and Alex Linder felt the same. The group would come to Knoxville and rally against the injustice and lack of media coverage. Protesters stood outside Knox News and Wait headquarters with signs reading, "Why the Blackout?" They would be met by counter-protesters. In the end, the protests were mainly peaceful and resulted in few arrests, including that of Alex Linder. During the trial of George Thomas in 2009, Detective Neville Norman with the KPD would testify that Thomas would say, "F that white girl. She didn't mean anything to me. You cops come into our neighborhoods and kill us, so why should I get involved?" The legitimacy of the statement would be brought into question. It allegedly occurred after the recording stopped, and Norman didn't write it down until 17 months later. The suspects? Well, they were friends with white people. George Thomas and LaMarcus Davison were both dating white girls. Were the murders racially motivated? That question is still debated today. Federal prosecutors initially wanted Vanessa Coleman to be a witness. In fact, she was treated like the star witness for the prosecution. When taken into custody in Kentucky, Coleman was not actually arrested. Vanessa and her mother would be put into protective custody after her name became public. She was offered immunity in exchange for testifying before a federal grand jury. Coleman never asked for a lawyer and never pled the Fifth, which would allow her to avoid incriminating herself. She testified, and state prosecutors were there to hear her every word. The Knox County District Attorney's Office would later indict Coleman based mainly on her grand jury testimony. It would prove to be a risky move for state prosecutors. After all, Tennessee law states that no witness shall be indicted for any offense in relation to which the District Attorney General has compelled the witness to testify before the grand jury. Vanessa would finally be arrested in Lebanon, Kentucky on January the 31st of 2007. Eric Boyd's federal trial would be dramatic and racially charged. The prosecution wouldn't be the one playing the race card, though. It would be Boyd's defense attorney, Phil Lamonco. During the jury selection process in April of 2008, Eric Boyd would make it clear that he was not afraid. According to those in attendance, he stared and smiled at Chirstian's family. At one point, he appeared to mouth the words, "Bring it." Ultimately, the prosecution had very little against Boyd. None of the other suspects were willing to testify, so they would be required to rely on scant circumstantial evidence. There would be two main witnesses that would put Boyd with the murderers. One man arrived at the nearby Waste Connections building and waited for his boss. He spotted the forerunner and claimed to have seen 4 black men inside when they passed by. He also said he saw a white Pontiac Sunbird. Boyd's cousin, Nicole Mathis, would take the stand and confirm that Boyd had borrowed her Pontiac Sunbird. She later found the car broken down at the Ridgebrook apartment complex where Boyd's mother lived. Inside, she found a sandwich bag full of bullets. Defense attorney Phil Lamonco would point the finger at Lamarcus Davidson's girlfriend, Daphne Sutton. After all, she had done the same thing Boyd was now being tried for. She gave Davison shelter after the murders and even slept with him. The veteran attorney alleged that Sutton was allowed to walk free because she's white and the niece of KPD officer Dennis Bible. While many in Knoxville agree that Sutton should be held responsible, it wouldn't matter to the jury. On April the 16th of 2008, Eric Boyd would be found guilty. It didn't help that Boyd had previously been in prison for a violent robbery spree in 1994 and attempting to murder a witness. He would receive the maximum sentence of 18 years. It would later be revealed that Steve Ahelan was a member of the jury and also the jury foreman. Why does this matter? Well, he was the executive sports editor for the Knox News Sentinel. While Eric Boyd's trial was intense, it would pale in comparison to that of Latavius Cobbins. He would be doomed from the start. It was obvious that Latavius had been involved in the rape of Channon Chirstian. There was DNA evidence to prove it. By all accounts, the case was easy for the prosecution. However, there was one big surprise that stunned onlookers and outraged the parents of the victims. After the prosecution had rested its case, Latavius Cobbins would take the stand against the advice of his attorneys. During his testimony, he would admit to receiving oral sex from Channon Chirstian and driving the car back to Chipman Street after the kidnapping. He denied and failed to mention anything else. During his testimony, Shannon's father would stand up angrily, but Cobbins would continue as if nothing had happened. Latavis's own words would not save him. He would be found guilty and the case would enter the penalty phase. The defense would now need to convince the Davidson County jury to save their client's life. His sister and 3 of his cousins would speak on his behalf. Jurors would learn about the rough upbringing Latavis experienced. Jurors would see pictures of a young Latavis before deliberations would begin. Would that be enough to save his life? After nearly 3 hours of deliberations, the jury would return and Cobbins would be sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. On the next episode, it was looking bad for the defense, but they had a few tricks up their sleeve. The prosecution would have an uphill battle on its hands. When asked why he never helped the couple, he said, "Should've, would've, could've, but didn't."